I want to ask you about what the last year or so has been like for you and watching kind of the evolution of the pandemic here in Saskatchewan.
It's been an extremely challenging year. And I think that's the reality for everyone. In our family, two docs, so working within healthcare and working in politics, obviously that has consumed so much of our attention. And it's been upsetting to watch a government choose over and over again to make the wrong decisions, to make political decisions when they should be making health decisions. And that has been certainly a source of frustration. At the same time, I've also felt proud to be in the role I'm in, both working as a family doc and being able to help out in some ways there, and being that public voice for smarter public health decisions has seemed meant to be.
The evolution of how the pandemic's gone in the last 12 months or so, we've seen different waves at different times. We've seen, obviously, the start of the year, really bad things happen in long-term care. Mm-hmm. And then it quieted down for quite a while and through the summer. And then, of course, we saw the fourth wave. What have you made of the government's response through those two major waves we saw here in Saskatchewan in 2020?
But I'll pop in that third one when we had Regina shut down for weeks, because there's a theme there. In November of 2020, 400 doctors wrote a letter and said, this is what we need to do. And the government basically shredded that letter, ignored it, acted too late, and hundreds of people died. In the spring, hundreds of doctors wrote a letter. The government ignored the advice. We got a terrible alpha wave, ICUs overwhelmed here in Regina, and we lost hundreds more people. And then this summer, instead of learning from that, instead of learning from those first two failures, this government decided to declare the whole thing over, basically walk away from any pandemic management at all, at the same time as they had modeling in front of them. They had the information in front of them. They had another letter from all the medical health officers across the province. They downplayed the risk, they ignored the experts, and hundreds of people died. And, it's not a story of shame on, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on me, that whole story. But it's just incredible to watch a government choose to refuse to learn. Choose to refuse to learn those lessons and get better on something that's so important.
What are your concerns going forward as we have this new arrival, this variant? They're saying in Ontario it's going to be the dominant variant very soon. What are your concerns about Omicron as we see it sort of emerging in Canada?
We're still learning exactly what that means, but the early indications are that it spreads much more easily and more quickly, and that there is greater risk of people who've already been infected being reinfected, greater risk of vaccine escape. So people who are vaccinated not being protected. Some debate and curiosity whether it's less severe or more. We don't know that as much yet. Obviously, we hope it's less severe, but more importantly, we hope we don't see major outbreaks here, see a major fifth wave. Our healthcare system still hasn't recovered. We still are not back up to full service. 65% capacity for surgery here in Regina right now. ICUs still far over usual capacity. We get hit by a fifth wave. We're back to calling the army. We're back to sending people across the country instead of doing what we should be doing, rebuilding our healthcare system and taking care of the people who have been sidelined throughout these last months.
You talked about not learning lessons. How would you like to see the government act with this potential threat here? You mentioned we don't know a lot about this right now. We know it's more transmissible by the early evidence. How do you want to see them respond to this in the next few weeks?
I think honesty and transparency are the key. So this summer, the Premier decided to hide that modeling that showed we were facing a Delta wave, hide the modeling that showed he could have reduced cases by 50% just by bringing back masks. Let's tell people the full information. What does the modeling say right now that the risk from Omicron means for Saskatchewan? And also be open about your plans. It's always a surprise. You get the call from the PEOC or the Chief Medical Health Officer that there's an announcement, and then we learn what the next step is. Let's lay it out. If cases get to this high or we get this many in our hospitals, this is what we'll do next. That's been a request throughout, and for some reason that planning ahead and having those conversations early is something this government has refused to do, and I think it's really resulted in a lot more resistance to logical changes. When people have time to say, okay, if that happens, this is what I'll have to bring out the masks again, or I'll have to reduce my bubble, I can prepare for that. It's the constant surprising and back and forth that is really difficult for people to go along with.
Do you think the province should have a better plan? The government should have a better plan, given we're so far into the pandemic, more than 20 months?
Yes, and having a plan for Omicron publicly available right now is just, it's just the bare minimum that we should be requiring from this government. Unfortunately, what we've seen instead is spin. When you've got a government that has made these decisions for political reasons, made decisions to pander to some of the extreme opinions in the province, they don't seem to want to go down that role of logical, responsible public health management and want to put politics ahead of people's lives. We need better than that.
You mentioned a plan going forward. What do you foresee in 2022 for yourself and a plan for the opposition?
Yeah, well, I think there's an old story that how do you make God laugh? You make plans. So I think, I don't know if he's laughing these days because it's not very good material, but anybody's plans have been blown out of the water. And we will absolutely continue to prosecute the record of this government to date. We want to be moving more and more into the propositional, showing our vision for where Saskatchewan can go next, talking about how we learn the lessons of the pandemic and move on. But of course, viral mutations may have other plans and we'll respond as we need to. Truth is, the smartest people in the world have no idea what things are going to look like a year from now.
What are some of your goals for getting that message out there of what your vision is for the party?
So right away, we're launching a series of policy task forces. We call them the Healthy Future Task Forces, and they're chaired by Mira Conway, the MLA in Regina Elphinstone Centre. She's going to be leading, along with our team of MLAs, conversations around the future of this province, the future of work, the future of energy and resources, the future of care, how we provide health care for the most vulnerable, and the future of youth, those opportunities all the way from childcare all the way up to higher education, inviting people into a conversation about what did COVID-19 reveal about the problems in Saskatchewan, the challenges in education and healthcare and long-term care, in the vulnerability of our economy, in our growing debt. Those didn't come with COVID-19, they were revealed and worsened by COVID-19. How do we look at that, change what we were doing before, learn those lessons, and plot that course to a truly healthy future?
What are some lessons that you've learned in the last year or so?
I guess it is that idea that you can have all the plans in the world, you can have an idea of how things ought to go, but there's an old quote. What's the biggest opposition to a government? Events. And the events of this last couple of years have been beyond what we could have imagined, but we've kept principles in mind. And I think that's the key learning is when you keep the health and well-being of Saskatchewan people as your primary goal, and you look at how you use economic growth and public services and good role modeling and public education as tools to reach that primary goal, then whatever the events may be, you keep focused on what matters most. If your focus is only politics, then you get pulled into politics. If your focus is people, you stay on course.
You had a party convention this year and you're given a vote of confidence from members. What have you taken from that about things that you need to do to bring even more people on your side and grow the party?
Yeah, and we were all in the NDP disappointed that we didn't fare better in the last election, but I've been really impressed at the way that our party has come together and started to do that work, preparing for the next campaign and not waiting until 2024, doing that campaign work now, prosecuting the record of the government, proposing our own alternative, our vision, and organizing like crazy. And I'm really hopeful. We've got a by-election coming up in Athabasca. hopeful that we'll be able to bring in a new NDP MLA here early in the new year, and then just build to success. I've never seen Saskatchewan people more frustrated with the Sask Party. The impression that Scott Moe has left on Saskatchewan people these last few months, that their health and well-being is secondary to his political goals, that's the sort of thing you don't get over. That leaves an impression that I think will carry over into the next election.
And how do you turn those people that are upset with the government's response to COVID or some of the issues you mentioned that were longstanding into volunteers, voters, supporters?
Yeah. At first, we listen to them, hear not just what those experiences are, but what their ideas are on how we can do better. And that's, again, where I come back to our task forces, where we'll be having town halls in person and on Zoom, lots of opportunity for people to bring forward their ideas as well as their complaints about the current situation, so that when we come around to having that platform in a couple of years, people look at that and say, not just, that's a good idea, but I see myself in that. I see my view of the future of this province, my hopes and dreams reflected in what the NDP is talking about, and are comparing that with the failures in the Sask Party record.
You mentioned off the top that you're a doctor, your wife's a doctor. You're obviously connected to that world. We've seen a lot of disagreement, very public disagreements from doctors, physicians, nurses throughout the last year with the government's response to COVID. You've even said the government's ignored medical health officers with some of their suggestions. What does the government need to do to build some bridges back with doctors, or do you think that relationship is going to be strained?
It will be very difficult for this government to rebuild relationships with healthcare workers. They've demonstrated over and over again that is not a group that they're going to support the way they need. In terms of how we build back a healthcare system that does engage healthcare workers, that to me is key. So we've seen, for example, this sort of back of the napkin privatized surgery plan and get us back past the backlog in 8 years. This is not a well thought out plan, and it's not a plan that involved the people who are going to have to actually implement it. We need to change that approach. Stop having these directives coming from ministers directly to the education system or health system, changing what they'll do based on political ideas. Invite people in. Have the head of surgery, have leadership within nursing at the table to figure out how you're going to address the backlog in surgeries in the public system, how you're going to build up the public system and get patients the care they need. That to me is key. So it goes back to the same answer as the previous question. The only way we build back a better relationship between the government of Saskatchewan and the healthcare workers is that we start by listening to them.
I wanted to ask you about the proposed security changes to this building, and the government saying it's not a nonpartisan thing, that they need to get with the times, that there's, it's not to quell protests outside. What do you make of that? And is there anything your party can do about changing this position from the government?
Yeah, it's a very foolish road to go down. We have been very well served by the Sergeant at Arms and the independent, nonpartisan security force that protects this building. And it's just so important that we remember this is the people's building. It's not a government building. It is not for the party of the day to decide how things are run in here. And this really flies in the face of some key democratic principles. And I keep thinking of, and maybe it's an extreme example, but I think of January 6th in Washington, D.C. If the Capitol Police had been responding to Donald Trump instead of doing their jobs in an independent, nonpartisan way. Knock wood, we'd never see anything like that here, but it brings to the fore just how serious of a conversation this really is.
You raised some questions about leadership at the SHA and the leadership void that's been left there by some resignations and some retirements. What are your concerns about those positions being open and some of the questions that haven't been answered about what happened with some of those decisions?
It certainly appears that there's been interference from the minister that has resulted in some of these changes, and that's not the way this ought to be. Again, you've got a government that has chosen to, for their own political reasons, meddle in decisions made by school boards around keeping kids safe, decisions made around getting kids vaccination. We don't know what all the minister was interfering with, but there's some pretty clear signals that he was making choices that made it impossible for the head of the health system in the middle of a pandemic to continue their job. And that, to me, says everything you need to know. You've got a minister who's failed to step up and bring in the things we need and has actually gotten in the way of keeping people safe. And the disruption that causes within the health system is enormous. Let's get back to the way it should be, with the board supporting the CEO and the CEO doing their job.
What's your message to people in Saskatchewan as we head into 2022?
21 was really hard, and so was the latter half of 20. It's been a lot, and people have been through a lot. I've been amazed by the way people have stepped up, the incredible support people have shown each other, the responsibility that people have taken to keep each other safe, to support local businesses, support local charities. Saskatchewan people have done a terrific job, and it will pay off. We will get past this. This is not forever. We don't know exactly when, but I just want to thank the people of Saskatchewan for the incredible leadership they've shown, and wish folks a Merry Christmas, and here's to a happier 2022. Hopefully we're looking back at this as a time of hard times, lessons learned, but something we've moved beyond.
One last thing I want to ask you about, I know you've already talked about this recently, but there's a lot of talk about booster shots, third doses, and the province does have vaccine on hand. It has people that are past 6 months who are not eligible by age right now or hoping to get their vaccination. What should the government be doing to try and get those people that are past 5 months a third dose if they want it, if there is capacity to deliver those shots?
Vaccine in fridges helps no one. Let's get those third shots into as many arms as we can. You remember last spring when it was 42, 41, 38, and people were getting excited to finally be eligible. Let's get back to that. Let's create some enthusiasm around people getting their booster dose. Let's encourage that because we are not seeing even the uptake in those eligible that we should. And anybody who wants to, obviously supplies allowing, let's get them that shot as quick as we can.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Adam. Have a happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.